Explore the vibrant arts and culture landscape of Michigan, a state with a thriving creative ecosystem that has birthed iconic movements like Motown and the Purple Rose Theater. Home to legendary musicians, writers, and artists, Michigan boasts a rich tapestry of cultural heritage known worldwide. Michigan Creates is a podcast series that will connect listeners with gifted artists and cultural institutions that are nurturing Michigan's vibrant creative landscape. This is Ara Tapuzian, host of Michigan Creates. In today's episode of Michigan Creates, I have the pleasure of speaking with Sarah Calderini, Executive Director of the Ann Arbor Symphony Orchestra. The Symphony Orchestra has been part of the Ann Arbor, Michigan community for close to 100 years and has had many exciting milestones along the way that we'll discuss in this episode. Sarah herself has an interesting and a bit of a non-conventional path that led her to the arts sector as she spent a lengthy career in the corporate world along with her own private business. This and much more will be discussed, so sit back and enjoy my conversation with Sarah about the Ann Arbor Symphony Orchestra. Sarah, this is great to be able to have an opportunity to talk to you today about not only your background, but the Ann Arbor Symphony Orchestra. And we came to know each other just really through an article that I saw online that we're going to talk about a little bit later and what's going on that's exciting with the Symphony Orchestra. But first of all, thank you for coming on. I want to talk about your background a bit. You have an interesting path to the current position that you're in. Talk to us about your professional background a bit.
Yeah, it is unusual. I spent 11 years in the corporate world working for a Fortune 30 company and got great experience there, worked with tremendously bright and creative people, and then left for personal reasons and mostly family and trying to juggle two careers and raise kids and all that stuff. I started my own company and I ran that for 16 years. So my for-profit experience is in both the corporate setting and an entrepreneurial one. The biggest difference is there's no safety net when it's your own gig.
Right.
But I learned so much from so many good people, peers and organizationally. It really set me up for when, as part of my time in Ann Arbor, I started as a volunteer at UMS after the Royal Shakespeare Company came to town. And I thought, what is this? What is this UMS thing? And I then was asked to be on the board and eventually was vice chair and chair of the board during a really critical time at UMS. An outgoing 35-year president and Ken Fisher and an incoming executive in Matthew Van Biesen. And so I was on the search committee that identified Matthew as Ken's successor and was able to serve as his first board chair, and both an incredible, working with the two of them, incredible privilege. And during that time, I really fell in love with the arts. And quite honestly, because I was an English major in college, so I wasn't really a business major, but because my experience had always been in business and for profit at that, I never realized you could be an arts leader and not be an artist, right? I'm not a musician. But the thing that really got me excited and inspired me was the way that arts really can transform individual lives and enrich our lives, but also building community is so important to me. And that's something, this whole idea about impact is something that really inspires me every single day.
Yeah.
So I went back to school to the University of Michigan, and which was convenient because I live here and have for 3 decades. At the age of 52, my classmates were the ages of my children, and they looked at me a little funny, but didn't know quite what to make of me. But eventually what they learned, I think through my student friendships with them, working in groups and whatnot, that you're never really too old to reinvent yourself with something you're really passionate about. And so I did that. I also did a graduate program at the University of Pennsylvania. And then eventually this job became open, this executive directorship at the Ann Arbor Symphony after really, again, a long time executive director, Mary Stefik-Blasky, and a real honor and privilege to take over from there and from all the good work that she did to help get this orchestra to where it is today.
So let's go back a step. First of all, nothing wrong with going back to college at an older age. So I give you kudos for doing that. But what was the degree in? Was it related to arts?
Yeah, it was based at the School of Music, Theater, and Dance at the University of Michigan. It's a program called Excel,
Yep.
and it's for arts leadership and entrepreneurship.
Okay.
Essentially, it was designed for young adults who are musicians, performing musicians, but also knowing that to get a gig in any kind of orchestra, but particularly, let's just say the New York Philharmonic, right? It's like going to the NFL if you're a college football player. Chances are it's not going to happen.
Right.
So this program was designed with that in mind, that you need to have some sort of fallback. It's
Yeah.
fabulous if you're an instrumental musician or a choral one for that matter, but it may not work out or you may not be able to make a living doing it. So just to give you a lot of real world experience in how the arts work. And it was perfect for me to build on my for-profit experience.
Yeah. And I think it's important to have the background that you have in doing what you're doing now. I really can identify that in the fact that I've got an association management background.
Yeah.
I've worked at different nonprofits, and you don't have to be an expert in that industry to be able to run that organization. You have to have the passion
Absolutely.
for it. You're coming to this with a wealth of background, both in the corporate world and as an entrepreneur. And I think, as we both know, you need all of that in the nonprofit world. As a matter of fact, it's
Yeah,
harder, right?
it is. It's different. A lot
Yeah.
of it's different. A lot of it's the same. People ask me fairly regularly how often I use my past experience. And I say every single day, all
Yeah.
day. And because we still need to figure out how to fulfill the mission, number one. And for-profit organizations have missions as well, right?
Right.
They're different, but every day we've got to fulfill the mission. We've got to make payroll and keep the lights on and
Yeah.
keep things running. I will tell you one of the really special things, again, back to what inspired me to make a left-hand turn career-wise, back to this idea of community impact. When you really love a community, like I love Ann Arbor and the environment around us, the entire Southeast Michigan ecosystem, so to speak, that it's so important every day to continue to make sure that we are creating that impact and providing opportunities to really enrich lives here with what we do. And in many ways, going back to my corporate experience, it doesn't seem super exciting to sell laundry detergent, which is what I was doing. But actually, it is important. It's an everyday thing that is important to people.
We're doing it right now while we're recording this. I know I've got laundry going on upstairs. So
do I, but
Yeah.
I'm not at the office before I left home.
Yeah,
So we
there's-
understand things like that. I will tell you, in all of my experiences, even though they're very different, the common thread, and I always think of it as like a golden thread, that I've worked with excellent people. And that's never, ever changed. And that's been a standard of mine. But also selling, right, an excellent product, something that is important and something that does bring joy, like actually really make people's lives better. And so that's the common thread, even as different as these all seem.
Yeah, no, I would agree that there is definitely a common thread that runs through all of that. And so let's talk about what that is, which is the
Yeah.
Ann Arbor Symphony Orchestra. So it's got obviously a rich historical background. Can you share sort of a brief synopsis of the symphony orchestra?
Yeah, we're in our 95th season. A lot of people don't know this, but we're what's called a per service orchestra, which means our musicians, although they are professional musicians, they are not full-time with us. In a larger city orchestra, let's pick the New York Philharmonic again, a musician gets up and goes to work every single day and they're on salary and they get full benefits. But we're per service, meaning when you play, you get paid. And in many ways, our musicians are, and I say this with all respect because we have such outstanding artists in our orchestra. They're gig workers. They wear many hats to make their living. They'll tour with other orchestras. Many of them are on faculty at local universities, including the one right here in town. and the one in the town next door and the one in Detroit. They give private lessons, or they are teachers in local public schools. Many ways to do it, and they piece it together. And so we're a very important part of that. And we have to realize our responsibility in helping to take care of and steward the health and creativity of these musicians. Now, I will say one of the really special things about a per service regional orchestra like the A2SO is that we are, for example, the largest arts employer in Washtenaw County. The money that our artists make stays here in this community. And so it's really an economic story as much as an arts story. The arts story is so compelling. This is such an outstanding orchestra. I'm so proud every single time I am interacting with these musicians, whether it's in a rehearsal setting or on stage. And I know we'll talk about stages in just a minute, but it is, I always say, Ann Arbor's best kept secret, or certainly one of them. And
how many musicians in the orchestra?
We've got 62 what we call contract musicians, which are people who are on contract. So those are the players that kind of give us our consistent musical product output. And then depending on their schedules, not everybody can play. Sometimes they're with other orchestras too in the area. And by the way, Michigan has more orchestras per capita than any other state in the country.
So how many orchestras
58.
are there in this? 58.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that's amazing.
It's an embarrassment of riches, quite honestly. And so it does allow for our musicians to get a lot of gigs.
Yeah.
And by the way, how lucky are we as residents of the state of Michigan, and in particular, Southeast Michigan, that we have a variety of offerings. And I say that about Ann Arbor. Every single night you could go out and pick from 5 different tickets to buy, and you're never going to be wrong. But my challenge to people about classical music, and first of all, classical music is not dying. People have been saying that for 400 years. And there are young people in the audience. So not only are we not dying, but you know what? If you've never been to an orchestra concert before, number one, what are you waiting for? Because this just may absolutely fundamentally transform your life.
Yeah. And
you just have no idea. But I know it because it's happened to me.
Sure. And you're living it. You're living every day. Classical music is not dying. And it's a good comment to make of 400 years has certainly proven that is a challenge. And so how does the Ann Arbor Symphony Orchestra stay relevant within the community or communities?
I'm so glad you asked that. It's such a good question, and one that sort of it's a soul searching question for every single orchestra on the planet, or chamber group, or there's so much out there. And first of all, there's historical repertoire that we can always dig into that has proven itself over the centuries, right? And a lot of people have varying opinions. Somebody may not like Shostakovich, right? Or I happen to. And somebody may not like Bartok, but they love Beethoven, they love Mozart. We were just talking in the office yesterday about how Ann Arbor's crazy for Rachmaninoff. It's just, I don't know, and Dvorak. Not to be a name dropper, but there's so much richness to pull from the historical canon.
Yeah.
There's also so much good music being written right now, or that's been written in the last 20 years. And it's not all monotonal. It's super interesting and inspiring. And it's in many ways because the events that inspire these modern day composers are fresh in our minds. We remember when the Berlin Wall came down. I do. We remember 9/11. We remember George Floyd, right?
Yep.
So it's getting back to this relevance thing. It's almost easier to relate, even though, quite frankly, let's pick anybody who's writing in tumultuous political times or historical times. It's all there. We can't relate to it so much because we read it in the history books.
Sure.
We didn't live it. So that's one way to remain relevant, is to continue on our programs, but for one, because our April program this year is a full Beethoven celebration. And so it's just Beethoven, which who's going to complain about that? But every other program features at least one living composer, and in most cases, a person of color or a woman. People of color and women have been writing classical music for decades
Right.
and centuries. It's just, but we don't always know that. So one of the ways we remain relevant is to say, you know what? Actually, this piece was written by or performed by someone who looks like not who you think of as a typical classical music composer or performer. And so that's very important. I think the other thing about being relevant is here at the Ann Arbor Symphony, especially post-pandemic, right? The pandemic hurt us all. Many arts organizations had to shut their doors during the pandemic, but we're so happy we still survived. It fundamentally changed the way we think about things and presented some challenges, but I think many more provided some opportunities. How are we going to do this now? How are we going to invite people back into the halls? Actually, maybe we don't want to be in the halls at all. Maybe our main focus or a primary focus of ours is going to be getting out into the community instead of making people wait for us and come to us and buy a ticket and worry if they know how to behave. Maybe we're just going to do chamber concerts in local community centers or churches and let's also offer it for free.
Okay.
And so I would say those main two things, it's programmatic, right? Yeah. In terms of what we put on the stage, and it's programmatic in terms of what we do off the stage.
So talk a little bit more about what you're doing off the stage. So the outreach that's going on. So making people feel comfortable with classical music, I think is important. And to your point of understanding how to act when you're listening to music, I recently saw something that a local church even was doing that as far as when is it appropriate to do that and that type of thing. Talk a little bit about.
Churches have had a legacy of people not feeling welcome too because they don't know how to act in church. Same thing. Yeah. And regardless of your beliefs, I used to say to my children, God doesn't care if you're wearing blue jeans. God just wants you there. But so and honestly, this is a conversation we could talk about. There's a lot, and we probably don't have enough time for it here, but a lot of discussion in this one particular area. Are you allowed to clap between movements? And I quite literally was at Hill Auditorium for a non-A2SO performance last week. And the person behind me was so agitated. And every time there was a pause between movements, they would say, please don't clap, don't clap. But then there are other people who say, you know what? This is the problem with classical music is that we've made it so that you need to be performative yourself as an audience member and behave correctly. And that
makes you uncomfortable.
It's not welcoming. Yeah. It creates no sense of belonging.
Right.
And I am personally of the opinion, if you like what you hear, if you're inspired to clap because you love what you just heard so much, clap. And in many ways, it's going to be up to the conductor to maybe do less of a pause between movements if it bothers them. I will say our music director, Earl Lee, who's just one of the most brilliant and delightful men on the planet, he will graciously turn around and give a smile as a way of saying thank you. Yeah. But it's not stopping the flow.
And so you're knocking down sort of the stereotypes of watching and listening to classical music that we've also seen in movies and how conductors are and in a bit.
Listen, we want you to come. We want you to hear the music.
Right.
We want you to share in this because the sharing is where the magic happens. When you're in a performing arts setting, whether it's theater or it's dance or it's orchestral music or it's rock and roll, it doesn't matter. It's brought us together and actually scientifically proven that our heart rhythms actually synchronize with each other. When we're in a space sharing the same piece of art. Now, isn't that amazing? It doesn't matter how many times I say it. It gives me the chills. That's the power of the arts right there. And we want you to be in here. Otherwise, we don't exist.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Exactly. So let's talk about earlier, I had alluded to how I came to know more about yourself and the symphony orchestra is through an exciting opportunity that hasn't happened in many years,
ever.
If I'm not mistaken, ever. So ever. Why don't you share what that is?
And ever is a long time, but
ever's a long time.
95 years. And again, I have to give a lot of credit to the people who came before me in my role, as well as before Earl Lee in the music director role, because to help us get to where we are today, which was we had our debut in Detroit at Orchestra Hall. This was a really special collaboration partnership with the DSO folks, and that team is so professional. And quite honestly, they have their own hall, and they have multiple spaces in that hall, and they're able to program in ways that we could only dream about. But they're a large city orchestra, and so not altogether different missions, but different ways of executing the missions. And so that partnership has been valuable and special and important to us. And then also it was coincident with the Sphinx Connect conference. We were the original supporting orchestral partners for the concerto competition back at Hill Auditorium when it was its very first year. And every year Sphinx Connect convenes in Detroit the last weekend in January, and upwards of 1,500 people come from throughout the world to support the mission of helping classical musicians of color, so Black and Brown musicians, to advance their careers in classical music, and diversify how our stages sound and what they look like. And they've been wildly successful. And so on this program, we also partnered with Sphinx. And by the way, we were not only at Orchestra Hall on the Friday night of the last weekend in January, we were here at the Michigan Theater the following night with the same exact program. But two Sphinx artists, I'm delighted to say Jesse Montgomery, who's a composer, Sphinx composer, won a Grammy just a few days ago, performing a cello concerto by Jesse Montgomery, as well as the tried and true and beloved Haydn cello concerto was a young artist named Tommy Mesa, Cuban American. And Jesse Montgomery, by the way, is African American. And just, I don't know, like applause, standing ovations, just everybody loved this in the context of, by the way, Mozart's birthday weekend, Marriage of Figaro Overture to open the program, and then the Mozart Jupiter Symphony number 41, which I'm still singing 2 weeks later. It was really wonderful. But this regional partnership idea, by the way, supported very generously by the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan, who's a real believer in regional partnerships, by the way. It was such a special moment. And I keep saying, you only get one first time. You only get one debut. And so we're still floating here.
Sounds like it. That's great.
We plan to do it again next year. So stay tuned for that.
And partnership in the arts is also very important. And to your point earlier of creating community and so forth, what's the future hold for the Ann Arbor Symphony Orchestra? What's next?
Boy, we have a number of things that are a little top secret at the moment.
Okay.
We haven't announced our season yet, but continued absolute progress on getting out into the community with these programs that we just scratched the surface of. The programs at libraries, senior centers, in-school programs, farmers markets, just sharing our art, our music, our talent with more and more people to a point where, so I think that people I'll borrow from John Batiste, if you saw American Symphony, who said, we don't love music because it's good. We love music because it's inevitable. And I love that idea so much. We need to continue to be inevitable for people. And more a part of the community, but also just continued progressive programming and some really great partnerships that we're excited to announce next year.
Sarah, I applaud all the work that you're doing. I can hear the passion in your voice. I give you lots of credit. I know that I'm going to be paying more attention for the work that you're doing. If folks want more information, they can go online, and what you can give the web address out.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the number 2, so.org.
Pretty easy. Sarah, thanks for being on Michigan Creates today.
Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to talk with you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Michigan Creates. We hope you've had fun diving into the creativity of our state. From Motown melodies to artisanal wonders, Michigan never fails to dazzle. But hey, the creativity doesn't stop here. Connect with us online, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes. Help us spread the word and also share your own artistic stories. So until next time, I'm Ara Tapuzian, and I want you to keep those musical instruments in tune, keep those paintbrushes moving, and keep those cameras rolling. Remember, in Michigan, the only limit is your imagination. Stay creative.